before we get started with this video, I just wanted to take a second to say that I think you are
talented, brilliant, incredible, amazing, show-stopping, spectacular, never the same.
It doesn't really matter what I think, does it? No, it doesn't. What matters is what you think. And so many of us, myself included, can have periods where we just don't think that much of ourselves at all. But why? Why is this? Well, this is what I wanted to explore in today's video. So you can, number one, walk away with an understanding of some of the factors which contribute to low self-esteem, and two, realise that it's just not your fault that you feel that way. As ever, all the topics that I touch on are timestamped in the description box below, along with videos, resources, papers, journals, blah, 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 blah. So without further ado, let's get straight into it. I watched this TED Talk the other day by a philosopher called... oh my god, I really don't know how to say his name. Alan. Okay, this really isn't important, but in his talk, he introduces two key lies which I think we are fed by society all the time.
We're told from many sources that anyone can achieve anything. We've done away with the caste system. We are now in a system where anyone can rise to any position they please, and it's a beautiful idea. Everybody, all politicians on left and right, agree that meritocracy is a great thing, and we should all be trying to make our societies really, really meritocratic. In other words, what is a meritocratic society? A meritocratic society is one in which if you've got talent and energy and skill, you will get to the top. Nothing should hold you back. It's a beautiful idea.
So what he goes on to explain is that being fed these messages can lead us to feel really, really crap about ourselves. Because if you think about it, if we accept that we're in this land of opportunities, that hard work will pay off, the best people will rise to the top, you're also inadvertently accepting the concept that people will get what they deserve in life. And that's all well and good if you're feeling kind of good in yourself, your life circumstances are on the up, but what if they're not? What are you then forced to conclude? That number one, you haven't worked hard enough. Number two, you're not good or special enough. Number three, that your life circumstances are reflective of your value as a person. Well, fundamentally, that logic is just massively, massively flawed. So in his book, The Spirit Level, Richard Wilkinson demonstrates that the UK and USA are two of the most unequal societies in terms of income gaps. And why is this a massive problem? Well, for one, health and social problems are much more pronounced in unequal societies, but so is the lack of social mobility. Being born in an unequal society means that it's actually much harder to improve your circumstances in your lifetime, but also across generations. And relative income is just one lens to look through when we're thinking about this problem. I haven't even touched on the additional obstacles which are just handed out to people from more marginalised backgrounds. So this idea that
we're all the same, everyone can achieve the same,
has to, at the very least, be presented with this enormous caveat that people's individual situations need to be placed in the context of society's inequalities. So the next time that you want to rage at yourself for falling short of something, maybe you need to have a think about raging against the machine. Okay, so I will stop blaming society for everything in a minute, but that minute has not yet arrived. So let's go back to our social graces, beautifully illustrated by assistant psychologist Chloe. This is the acronym that summarises different aspects of your personal and social identity. Now, the society that you are born into will have a value hierarchy across each of these areas. And it's important for me to say that these value hierarchies, they're not true or right or fair, but fundamentally they do exist, and they end up teaching us that certain characteristics or identities have more intrinsic value, like they're more desirable than others. So let's take an example, appearance. That's an easy one in Western society. So there are certain beauty standards which exist in our society, which are fed to us constantly, which will have the most random opinions on, say, the fullness of our lips, the size of our butt, how much fat we carry on our body. And this is all well and good if you say, look like Kate Moss in the 90s, and then were somehow able to metamorphosize into a Kim Kardashian lookalike in the 2010s. But if not, you may at some level be left feeling that there are certain aspects of yourself which would be better if they were somewhat different. And I think it's really easy to underestimate how much these value hierarchies can just trickle in to our psyche and affect how we think about ourselves. And I think this is best illustrated by the Clark doll experiment.
Which doll is the black doll? And which one is the white doll?
That one.
Which doll is the pretty doll? Which doll is the nice doll? Which doll is the bad doll? Which doll is the nice doll? And which doll is the bad doll?
Yeah. I mean, how horrendous is that? And I know this won't be the case for all of these children, but at least some of them have never actually explicitly been told these messages, and they've still ended up concluding these ideas about people who look like them. So you have to then wonder, like, how are these kids left feeling about themselves? Social media. So, okay, anecdotally, I would say I've got myself to a place where I put the work in, I feel kind of alright about myself most of the time, you know, I know what I've got, I know what I'm not. That's all good. And yet, every time I open Instagram, I end up just feeling like a troll freak. And why is this? Because comparison literally is the thief of joy. And lots of studies indicate that often it's not what you actually have, objectively speaking, but how this stacks up against everyone around you that's important in terms of your own well-being and happiness. So let's say, you know, you have a biscuit and everyone around you also has a biscuit. And you're thinking, cool, like, I feel pretty alright in myself. But then let's take that same scenario. You've got the same biscuit and everyone around you now has a tub of biscuits. And now you're just left sitting there feeling like total sh**. And through the power of social media, our opportunity for comparison no longer reserved for our in real life social circle. No. We now have an app in our back pockets which can connect us to the highlight reel of billions of people across the globe. Fantastic. And okay, when I open up Instagram, I look a little something like this. And if I'm not careful and I start doom scrolling, I can be met with this never-ending feed of glamour, wealth, squad goals, six-packs, all neatly packaged up with glossy filters and a touch of Photoshop. Like, it's not even a fair comparison to make, so no wonder a lot of us feel a lot worse about ourselves. And I think also, with the proliferation of social media influencers, we are once again fed that message of anyone can become anything. These lives of wealth and luxury are no longer reserved to actors, musicians, and celebrity circles. No, apparently anyone with a smartphone can catapult themselves into the stratosphere. I mean, there are literal canines who have careers bigger than anything I could ever dream of. And I remember when I was at school and I studied ICT, there was this concept of garbage in, garbage out. So the idea that if you input data which is just massively flawed, you're bound to get nonsense output. And I think this really applies to the case of social media. Like, if we are mindful of the fact that the data that we receive from our social media apps is massively skewed and fuels our intrinsic drive to just keep up with the Joneses, then maybe it's time that we just take a quick step back from our phones. Okay, that's never gonna happen. But at the very least, taking some time to think about how we can curate the information that we consume. Some of you OGs might remember from my video on childhood trauma that our early relationships shape what is called our internal working model. So this is our understanding of ourselves, others, and our relationships. These relationships will have a massive impact upon how you feel about yourself. And I don't know if any of you have watched the Defiant ones on Netflix, but I think this point is really nicely illustrated by Jimmy Iovine. So he's one of the founders of Beats Electronics. And he goes on to describe the situation early on in his career where he was invited to be a sound engineer for none other than John Lennon. And this is how he describes it.
Like anyone from my generation, ground zero was the Beatles. The Beatles! I was just plain old terrified. I was in way above my head. But my father was a real cheerleader. He always told me that every room you go into is better because you're there. So I never felt like nobody wants me here, I don't go long.
And I think this is such a beautiful example of how love and attention can really help to build your self-confidence way into your adult years. But on the flip side, if you don't receive these lovely messages as part of your early life experiences, it can have a real detrimental impact on how you feel about yourself and your self-esteem. And I think, as ever, it's so important to highlight that you don't need to have lived through this torrid, dramatic abuse for you to come away feeling less than amazing about yourself. Maybe it was the case that you felt like your parents didn't have time for you, or you were kind of the black sheep of the family. That is really enough to lay a little bit of a rocky foundation for your self-esteem. And you know, there's really not much we can do in terms of rewriting our past experiences, but into adulthood, we can certainly make choices about the people that we choose to surround ourselves with. And it's like, if these people aren't building you up and making you feel good about yourself, then snip, snip, they've got to go. Cognitive behavioural therapy actually does have a model for low self-esteem, but okay, I'll just show you. I mean, have you ever seen something more unnecessarily complicated? Like, what in the hell is going on around here at the bottom? But something that I do think is really useful about the model, and I personally massively relate to, is this idea that once we've developed these negative beliefs that we have about ourselves, we then set these unrealistic rules and standards that we live by, which we then use as a benchmark for our own self-worth. But I'll illustrate this with an example, so it's not too abstract. So take my scenario. So as a kid, growing up, very shy, very introverted, and those aren't exactly qualities which are massively celebrated in society, let's say, and because of that, I developed this massive complex about being boring, forgettable, average. And I unconsciously set these rules for myself to create as much psychological distance as I could between the fears that I had about myself and then how I acted and I was perceived by others around me. So let's take this fear and belief that I was really boring. So as a teenager, I developed this rule that when I had free time, I always had to be doing something social. And so over the summer holidays, this is really embarrassing, but over the summer holidays, I had this like lame little diary that I would keep where I could track everything that I'd done every single day for 6 weeks. And then I'd have this like secret coding system so I could then indicate the days where I'd done something like halfway interesting or rebellious, like going to the park and getting drunk with my friends or kissing someone, which is just really tragic. But the point of that story was the standard that I set myself was like completely unrealistic. Like my fellow introverts will recognize that doing something all the time in your free time is just like A, not feasible because you just like don't have enough friends to sustain that, but B, it's so exhausting. And with these unrealistic standards, you feel okay when you're able to meet them, but then there's always that anxiety that you're not going to be able to, and then the inevitable disillusion when you do end up dropping the ball. And I think there are so many of us who have these kind of standards, like having to be perfect or excelling in everything that you do, never making mistakes, and it's just like we're massively setting ourselves up for failure, number one, but number two, we then don't give ourselves the opportunity to recognize all the good stuff that we are doing. The final thing that I want to touch on, which can serve to intensify our low self-esteem, is the way we talk to ourselves. Do we show ourselves compassion in the light of challenging circumstances? Or do we berate ourselves? Dr. Kristen Neff is a prolific researcher in this area, and she defines compassion as the sum of 3 things. Number 1, self-kindness over self-judgment. So when things go wrong, it's not like,
Hey, you actual freak.
it's more like,
Hey, You dropped the ball there. Not a big deal. We can go back and try again.
Number 2, common humanity over isolation. This is recognizing that making mistakes and suffering is common to everyone, and it's not been put on this earth simply to torment us and us alone. Number 3, mindfulness over self-identification. This is basically just our ability to take a step back and be able to recognize things for what they are without over-exaggerating or catastrophizing the situation. She then published a study looking at self-compassion across cultures. Now, where do you think the UK stacked up? The Greek, UK and French samples appear to have the lowest levels of self-compassion, and the UK sample was significantly lower than the Greek sample. Classic. But listen, this can't be another stick that we use to beat ourselves, because the way that we talk to ourselves fundamentally isn't our fault. It's often a reflection of those early life relationships and how we were treated by other people growing up, and it's our psyche's attempt to protect ourselves from falling short of those unrealistic standards that we set. With that said, I personally have found it really useful to recognise the fact that the way that I treat myself can either serve to fuel the fire of low self-esteem or help to extinguish it, and it's up to me to decide which path I want to feed. So putting it all together, like for me personally, I think it's so important to talk about low self-esteem because in my mind it's kind of like the lesser known ugly troll sister of mental health. But there are so many studies which suggest that there is this big link between low self-esteem and mental health issues, and some studies which even suggest that low self-esteem can directly cause issues like low mood and anxiety. So I really hope this video has given you a little bit of food for thought and introduced some of the key concepts which I think are really important to helping us understand low self-esteem. With all of that wrapped up, I'm going to leave you for another week and very much look forward to speaking to you next time. Ciao for now.